Okay, I think I would like to take this sketch that we did of Luna, my cat, and let's turn it into a full project. In another video, I explained to you about the papers and how they worked, but I didn't talk to you about watercolor papers. So let's do a watercolor painting and show you the techniques, but more importantly than that is workflow. 1,000 brushes are great, but if you don't have the workflow, you've got a problem. So this paper is the watercolor granulated 02. I am going to come back up to my wrench icon in the top left, and I'm going to insert a file. I've got a file, and this will be available as a download called Luna Sketch. Tap on that, and there's my sketch, ready to go. I am going to tap the little layer icon, and I'm going to come up to rename at the top, and I'm going to call this sketch. And for now, I think I will come to the layer name and swipe to the left, and I'll turn on lock because I don't want to accidentally draw on that layer. Now, as we go through this project, I'm probably going to bring in other files, and I'm also probably going to be creating extra layers. Can I recommend you do what I just did and you name your layers, or at least the important ones? Like the sketch layer, that's an important layer. And look, come on, let's be realistic about it. You're probably not going to name all your layers, and you're probably going to end up with a whole load of layers called layer 5, layer 7, layer 22. And you'll forget what's on them, and you'll play that happy game of turning the layer invisible and visible again just to figure out what is on layer number 56. But I do understand it is a bit of a pain in the bum to have to name all your layers simply because it takes you out of that happy creative zone. You're having to do something like typing and thinking about your layers, but at least just try and rename the most important layers. Okay, the next thing, come back to our wrench icon again. Come to where it says canvas, come to reference, turn that on. We did this before, and then drag it up just somewhere where you can see it plus your drawing. Tap on image and import image. I imported the photo of Luna into the Photos app, so it's there waiting for me. I might resize it a little bit, and I'm going to zoom in because in this lesson, I want to do two things. I want to choose a color palette for this, and I want to start putting in those dark stripes you can see on Luna's fur. So for the palette first, when you're doing your palette, you always do your palettes at the top above things like that granulated medium paper layer. To do this, I always use probably my hard blocker inner because it's a simple, no-nonsense brush that just gives you a color and no fancy decorations. Now, part of the Drippy Cat Art Studio, there's various palettes. But what I've done is, look, I've got DC Pigments Essentials, DC Pigments 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in another video, I explained how I'd taken a whole load of traditional pigments and put those colors on a file which is going to be useful for you. But I also took those colors as well. And if I come up to where it says compact, I'm going to change this to cards. Tap on that. Now, that's the Nouveau files. But if I come right up to the top, this is the DC Pigments Essentials palette, but in cards form rather than compact. And you can see I've put the names down. Cadmium Yellow Light, Yellow Ochre, Burnt Sienna. And if you go to the DC Pigments 1, 2, 3, and 4 palettes, these are all the colors that I've worked out the color values for and given them the name. So if you are a traditional artist, look at that. You've got your Permanent Rose. You've got your Naples Yellow. So you've got a whole load plus a whole load of fairly neutral tones like Charcoal, Ivory, Black. Let's come up to our DC Pigments Essentials and work out what colors I might like to use when I'm doing my picture of Luna. Well, I think straight away, I know I've got Ivory Black. So let's make a little square of Ivory Black there. I think I can see some Naples Yellow in there. And I think Yellow Ochre will be useful as well. Burnt Sienna, I think that could be useful to certain areas. Look, when I do this, it's a watercolor painting. I might take a little bit of artistic license when it comes to the colors I'm putting down. I think Quinacridone Violet, looks good for The inside of those ears, also bits around the mouth area. Have you noticed, especially with young cats, they have slight pinky areas around the mouth? Anything else from here? Maybe that raw umber might do a nice job, and maybe the pain's grey. I'm not saying I'm going to use all these colours, but I just want them there so that I can use all the colours on the screen and not have to keep on coming back to my palettes. Now, what about that nose? What about Indian red? Let's try that for the nose. Okay, so if you're used to using watercolour painting, you might be turning around and saying, well, are you actually going to mix these colours together? Well, certainly within modern watercolour painting, there are loads and loads of different styles. I'm going to do just one, and I'm going to adapt it a little bit. I'm going to lay these colours directly onto my canvas or my paper, so it's a bit like straight out of the tube. But I'm also going to go back in and I'm going to start using my glazing brushes to start changing those colours, but that's further on down the line. For now though, I'm going to go with this palette, see what I can do with it, and come back to my layers panel, come down to draw here, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to rename this to stripes. I'm going to choose my colour on the end. What was that? That was ivory black. It's nearly black, but it's not a pure, deep 00 black. It's what? About 13% bright? So a quick tip for you, especially if you're doing traditional art and not something that's supposed to look computer generated, try and avoid pure black and try and avoid pure white. And certainly try and avoid putting them down on the canvas directly. Now for my brush, I'm in my General tab and I'm going to use DC Nice Constant Opacity down the bottom. It's a variation of the Nice brushes, and if I show you what it does, press soft, press hard, press soft again. The opacity doesn't change, but the size gets bigger or smaller. That is what I want. Two-finger tap to undo that. Now let's take a look at this bit. Now what's my brush size? I'm on, what's this? Size 12%, is that going to be the right size for me? Let's try a couple of these stripes and just put them in. Yeah, that's working for these bits up here, certainly. And I'm not going to be too precious about this. I'd rather have an expressive brush stroke than a completely accurate brush stroke. And just make these various marks that I've got. I've got my guides, but I can see now that I'm close up, there are some bits here which I didn't include, or there's a little bit more to them than I originally thought, and just start putting in the various marks that make up the stripes on Luna's fur. Oh, there's a fairly large dark bit just up here, just around the rear side of the ear. I'll put that in. Now you notice that I'm using a brush which is, well, I can get a hard edge, but as soon as I start to press down, I get more of a soft edge. That's the effect I want. I don't want this to be too hard. You do get hard edges sometimes when you're doing watercolour paintings, depending upon the style. But for this, I want it soft edge because pretty soon I'm going to show you a technique for putting in all those little bits of fur which are sticking out, for example, on that forehead. Because I've got some fur brushes and I want the excuse to be able to use them. That will be coming up in the next video, but for now, it's just a case of putting these marks down, being fairly free and easy with the way I do it. Oh, and I've definitely got these darker areas around Luna's eyes. I want that to be pretty smooth. Let's make this bit bigger. Come around. I want it to be smooth around the inside of the eye. Fairly precise. But it's okay if it's a bit blurry as it goes towards the outside. This is supposed to be a watercolour painting, so you would expect a certain amount of looseness with the brush strokes. Well, it depends. If you're doing a very precise watercolour painting, you want to control the watercolour, but with this one, I want a bit of expressive texture in here, and I want a chance to play with my various watercolour brushes, which are just down here. But that's coming up. So control things fairly carefully here, maybe go over things a little bit. Also, don't forget, If I come to my eraser or my eraser, depending upon where you're from, and I just tap and hold on it just for a second or two, I get the same brush I'm using to draw with that I can now erase with. And if I do that, I can do something which I may have mentioned to you in another video. I can cut in a little bit and create some fairly sharp edges. So I can control the areas I'm putting down. Wipe on, wipe off. But again, come on, let's not get too uptight and focused on this. Let's try and keep it a little bit loose. Also, while I'm here, let's come to my smudge brush. Now for this, I'm in my blending glaze and I'm going to use DC Crunchy Smudge because I'm finding with this, the opacity is set up to full, so it's going to drag things quite away. My brush size, well, you can see it's, what, about 8%. And I can use this just to pull these areas around, and you notice when I do, this brush has a tendency to flare out a little bit, and I want a little bit of chaos in the bits that I'm smudging. Remember, this is supposed to be a loose watercolour, so I don't want a whole load of really hard edges. I want the idea of bits of chaos in there. Not everywhere. If it's chaos everywhere, you just get a mess, but I want a blend of chaos plus something a little bit more controlled. Okay, look, those are the techniques I'm going to use to colour the dark bits of this painting in. Now that you know that, there's no point in you just sitting around watching me draw. I will carry on. If anything important occurs to me while I'm working, I will let you know. And oh yeah, look, here's one thing, look. There's Luna's cat's eyes, her pupils. This photo was taken during the day, and so, well, you know, with the cat's eyes, during the day they get really quite small. People tend to prefer pictures of cats when their pupils are just a little bit bigger. Like in the evening or like at night, cat's eyes just get bigger. So I'm going to make the pupils themselves bigger than they are in the actual photograph. Again, it's a little bit of artistic license. It just makes the cat personality seem a little bit warmer. And if you've seen a cat's eyes at night, they practically fill the entire eye rather than this small area that I've got here. Yeah, that looks about the right size for me though. Now, do I want to try and draw the same thing for the other eye slit? Well, I could do, but look, here's a trick for you. That pupil is probably going to be more or less the same on the other side. So I come up to this little S-shape icon, just on the top left. That is my selection icon. From the various choices here, I've got freehand selected. So now I just draw around this pupil, and when I get back to the beginning, you can't see it very clearly, but there's like a little circle there, which my cursor is snapping to where I started the curve. And if I tap on that, that is my new selection. Then I come down to where I'm circling, copy and paste, tap that. And if I come to my layers panel, the copy and paste copied my selection and pasted it onto a new layer called, amazingly enough, from selection. Now, if I come up to the icon I'm circling, my transform icon, and I can just drag, I'll drag from the outside and just drag the whole thing across to about there. Now, one thing I am going to do is make this just a tiny, tiny bit smaller by dragging from one of the corners in slightly, ever such a tiny bit, because it's very subtle, but the eye on the left is a little bit further away than the eye on the right. And so if it's further away, I'm just going to exaggerate that a little bit by making the pupil just a tiny bit smaller. This is a very common practice when you're doing pet portraits, people portraits. You kind of exaggerate things like this just to try and help the viewer understand what you're trying to do. So I can commit to that just by coming to another tool or another menu. In this case, I will come to my layers panel. I will tap on the layer icon and I'm going to come to merge down. This will make this layer merge with the layer below. So now everything, all my stripes are on one layer. Okay, so I'm going to carry on. I will speak to you when I've put down the various different areas of, in this case, ivory black. So I'll speak to you then.